Hello, and welcome to the 108 podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Raquel.
And we're the Type 1 Together girls.
We are stripping down life with type 1 diabetes from two people who live different versions of it every single day. Please remember, Type 1 Together does not give medical advice. We are only sharing from personal experience. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 108 podcast. Today, I'm here, just me today. Unfortunately, I'm missing Amanda so much, but with Courtney, who is here to discuss all things T1D, relationship to food. We were actually both diagnosed at 5, which is really exciting. She'll dive more into her story and then also touch on hormones and how that relates to type 1 because it's such a big topic that we don't talk about enough. And really quick, I'm sorry if I'm a little frazzled. We just had an earthquake in San Diego as soon as Courtney and I got on this call, so I feel like my mind's a little scattered, but we made it. Welcome to the show. Courtney, can you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your story, especially because you were diagnosed so young?
Yeah. So I was diagnosed when I was 5 years old. I'm the only person in my family that has type 1, so it was a very foreign concept. And I grew up kind of with diabetes in the background, a lot of like ignoring that I had it. I think I did like what was necessary to live, survive, to navigate like high school and middle school and all like those awkward phases. And then even in college, I think it took like an even worse route when I was independent and alone. And I think it was just a hard thing for me to really grasp. And I didn't fully understand until I was working as a labor and delivery nurse bedside and night shift in the middle of COVID, and I was like, I am unwell. And there are so many layers that added up on top of it. And so I got help, and I got help mainly for just like symptoms of hormonal problems. So fatigue, cystic acne, stubborn weight gain that wasn't coming off, all of these like hormonal problems. And I had a friend that was health coaching at the time, and I reached out to, and we worked together. And it was very interesting because in addressing all of these hormonal problems, my A1C and blood sugar and everything drastically took a different and a change and a turn. And so my physical health was just completely different from that season. So that was about 5 years ago. That was in 2020. And ever since then, it kind of launched me into a really passionate pathway towards holistic health and women's health, since that was my original like first love. And and so now I work with women to just help them optimize their hormones with type 1 diabetes to balance their blood sugar.
So cool. And I cannot wait to dive into that. Before we get into your adult life, I'm curious because we have so many parents listening. Can you talk more about, so I agree, it was kind of easy as a 5-year-old all the way until I was honestly in college and on my own to just kind of ignore diabetes in a way and like put it in the background. And I was doing the things, but I wasn't thriving with it. Can you talk a little bit more about what that was like? Were your parents helping you a lot? What was their involvement? And like kind of what that was like before the shift happened?
For sure. So my parents were wonderful. My mom specifically was like my go-to girl. Like I feel like we were in the trenches together, and like really the only person that I really feel like saw what I was going through. So any moms, I'm like, you guys are just everything. Like truly, even now I'm 27. I'm like, my mom's the only one that really understood like my childhood. But I would say I was very independent. So I'd say she did a very good job of like, when I was at home, it was this breath of fresh air and she would take over. But when I would be away from the home, I was super independent and wanting to do everything myself and felt like I could do anything myself. And by a very young age, so like probably like 8, I was very independent. But my mom was still like actively helping.
Oh, that's amazing. And I totally relate to that. When you say she's actually helping now, does she like follow your CGM or anything?
No. So I feel like So she was really active when I was, my like time, I didn't even wear a CGM until I was 21, which is insane. But, so I feel like after I took a pivot in my health and just was really confident in that, she's kind of just been hands off knowing that I'm good. But growing up, we used to have to like write our blood sugars in a book. And at the end of the day, my mom would review it. And then that was how she would be like, okay, what are we going to do differently? And blah, blah, blah. But
exactly.
I was late to the technology game. I grew up at the beach, so I was very like anti technology on my body. And so we did it old school for a long time.
Hey, you got to do whatever works for you.
Yeah.
And I think there is something about us not having access to, do you use Dexcom now, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Okay, and the Follow app at a young age, because a lot of us, I think, were forced to become a little bit more independent more quickly, or we wouldn't have been able to have the freedom and go off and do things without our parents there. And so now I think parents are able to kind of, I don't want to use the word micromanage because it can be a positive thing too, but like deal with all the blood sugar stuff in the background so the kids can actually just go to school and not have to worry about it as much.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So then you are taking things into your own hands more. Tell us about the moment or moments, I'm sure it was over time, that you realized like something's not good. I need to make a change.
Yeah. So I think that it would have been like when I was starting to care for other people. So I was a nurse for others, and I would be working night shift, and I was labor and delivery, so I'd be like giving someone an epidural and my blood sugar is low, and I'm like, I can't help you because I can't help myself, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that was a moment where I was like, I am very limited by my ability to like show up in the workplace to be myself because of this thing. And I think that is kind of what prompted me to get help. And also seeing that I just felt like didn't feel understood by like a normal provider. So I had these symptoms and I was like so tired. I just felt like everything, no matter how healthy I ate or how much I worked out, like nothing made sense. And so I think different symptoms throughout time made me feel like there's something where I can't think like the average woman. I can't show up to like the places that I want to go to and feel like myself. And that just came to a peak during 2020 when I was like, we all had space to really think about things. And I think it was more like a breaking point over time, probably over like 2 years, where I was like, okay, I don't feel very well.
Yeah. So what are the steps that you then took?
Yes. So I had a friend who was health coaching specifically for women's hormones. And so I reached out to her, and we really worked on eliminating inflammation, which is so crazy because I had no idea that that was a part of my body. I was like, I was a member at Orange Theory. I like at that point had really gone deep on eliminating carbs. So I was like eating very low carb, and I was doing all the right things. And so when I was working with her, I realized like, okay, this isn't a right or wrong thing. This is a I'm inflamed thing. And that imbalanced blood sugar actually just like really affects every woman's hormones, like regardless of having type 1 or not. And I think that made me more receptive to receive that information, right? I think when we have type 1, we're like, and you like are targeted for that, you're like, leave me alone, like I can be fine, I'm just like everyone else. And so I think when I heard like, okay, if I have imbalanced blood sugar and that affects my hormones, that's every woman across the board. And so I was like, okay, I can receive that and I can work on that, just like my best friend beside me who like needs to work on that as well. And so that was like something very helpful. So we reduced inflammation through eliminating dairy and gluten for just a small time.
Okay.
And by eating primarily whole foods and removing processed foods. And that changed the game towards my insulin resistance, which over time, like I was taking in 50% of the insulin that I was taking in before, which helped ultimately balance my blood sugar even more. And then another thing we worked on was just consistent movement. So prioritizing consistency over intensity, whereas I was going to Orange Theory, like I would sleep for 4 hours after a shift and then like go and do this high intensity workout. I would prioritize sleeping, and like it could just be a long walk or a couple mile run. Like it doesn't have to be this like intense workout. And so really I found just basic habits added up over time really make the biggest difference and reduce that inflammation for me to reverse these symptoms, which I later found I had PCOS, which like 30% of type 1 women have PCOS, which is so interesting, and began to heal.
Yeah. Okay. So much to dive into. So I know parents listening, you might be like, oh, well, this is adults and like it doesn't apply. But the thing is, I mean, I have a very, very similar story I'm about to go into. And I wish that I knew about this more growing up. And I wish that my family was able to take action on little lifestyle things earlier. So it does matter for parents. So around the same time, actually, so I had been on, I'm going to go the birth control direction for a second. I had been on it for over 10 years. And actually, I remember the day that it was actually my endo who told my mom that, oh, she should get on this at a young age for the only reason being blood sugar. She was like, it's going to make blood sugars easier to manage. She's not going to have the crazy spikes like when she gets her period or anything like that. And I got on it at that point, which I now have done my own deep dives into birth control and have my own opinions and whatever. There's good and bad for sure. But the fact that that was put on me because of diabetes, I don't love. And what happened was around that 2020 time, I realized I felt so inflamed. My body was so puffy. I was taking so much insulin. I was also, at that time, I had just graduated from UT Austin. I was a dance major, so I was literally exercising all day long. I also worked at a cycling studio at the same time, and I was cycling there multiple times a week. And it's like my body was just so inflamed and stressed from all the activity. And I honestly like had extra fluff on me. Like it wasn't like I was just overworking, thinking it's what I needed, when in fact I really, really needed the opposite. And I ended up seeing a functional medicine doctor because I decided to get off birth control because I was wondering if this was part of the issue. And I was having a lot of trouble getting my cycle back. It took me 2 full years to get it back at like a normal amount or a normal time frame. It was like coming every few months for a while. And they told me I had PCOS, which, for those of you who don't know, maybe you can explain better. I believe it's just a set of symptoms. If you have 3 symptoms, I think, of a long list, then they can say you have PCOS, but it's not like a blood test they can do and necessarily be right.
Yeah, so there's no blood test, but you have to meet, I think, 3 of the criteria that is listed. And one of like the more definitive symptoms are the cysts on your ovaries, and that can be done via like a transvaginal ultrasound. But then there are other things that can be done through lab tests, like a testosterone and hormone estrogen panel. So if you have elevated testosterone, that is a sign of PCOS, or symptoms of like facial hair or different things where it's showing like your hormones are essentially imbalanced. So you have an elevated testosterone, a lower estrogen or lower progesterone for your natural woman's body. And I guess, that's like a summary of it.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I had the test done. I didn't end up getting an ultrasound. I was scheduled to, but then by the time I was going to, everything was actually back in range, and they said I didn't have it anymore, but I'll get there. So during that time, ended up, because of COVID, I stopped all the dancing. I stopped all the cycling. I was just walking, and I was no longer on the pill, and I was at home cooking more, and I also was working with the doctor, taking certain supplements, things like that. And eventually, after it might have been a year or 2, all my blood work was normal again, which was awesome. But a big part of PCOS is insulin resistance, right? Like, which that sounds like such a normal thing for us as type 1s to talk about, but this is something that lots of non-type 1s are getting as well. And insulin resistance, unfortunately, is so common these days. So it kind of like made me dive in just to the world of hormones and realizing how connected it was to blood sugar, because once my levels were all back in range, suddenly I needed less insulin. Like you were saying, it wasn't as hard to dose for the foods that I love. I wasn't restricting things, right? I do always focus on whole foods and trying to eliminate processed foods, but I don't necessarily cut anything out, and I don't eat low carb. But everything just became so much easier. And I think about that all the time because I see a lot of my friends who are having those really stubborn blood sugars and taking so much insulin, and they're on that cycle of just needing more and more and more, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's like you can tell that their body is inflamed and it's not able to uptake that insulin as well. But no one talks about this. So I don't even know like the right thing to like say to get this across to people, but like these things matter. Is there more you can talk about just in terms of like how hormones and blood sugar is related?
Totally. So I think like with type 1 specifically, I think sometimes it's so emphasized on like the ranges are so much more wide, and like you almost justify out of range blood sugars because it's so hard, because it is unfair, and like it's natural to like be on a fight. Like I feel like over in your childhood when you grow with type 1, it's like it's okay, like it'll come back down, and it is, and like there is no guilt for having a high blood sugar. But I think something that is almost like overcompensated is the reverse of like the amount of resistance and inflammation that comes from having these like roller coaster blood sugars. And so I think it's this tension of having to hold both, of like there will be days that are really difficult to navigate, but then also like knowing the side effects of every single woman, if you have blood sugar, imbalanced blood sugar and on these roller coasters, are gonna have some side effects of hormones and of just like some distress, and that's just across the board. And that's like I guess just these symptoms, and I can describe the symptoms. So fatigue and difficulty losing weight and irritability, mood swings, your irregular periods. Specifically if you have type 1, I think it's a lot of women waking up with their blood sugar high, that like imbalance of cortisol, or maybe having too much cortisol because of your body being overstressed. And those are all things that we can work on with not just targeting like rates and ratios and settings and your pump and technology, but I think there's a lot we can do in our habits and the way that we view food and the way that we approach food that can make just diabetes so much easier and our blood sugar is so much easier to manage.
Yeah, so let's dive into the food piece a little bit.
Do it.
I guess how has your relationship to food, and wow, I cannot talk. Let's start that over. How has your relationship to food evolved over all of these years? I know you said you had eliminated things at one point, now you're not. So hear a little bit about that.
So I would say like my main why for everything I do stems from a very long period of having a difficult relationship to food. I think that my family, like a value is that like we have great cooks in our family, like we love good food, we love meals, and we love sharing. Like that's just like a central value I think of our family, is we enjoy just sitting at our tables for a long time, like eating and talking. And when I was diagnosed, I think that created this element that was really difficult, because all of a sudden, like, and my family wasn't medical, so like my mom is over here trying to navigate like what does that look like when they made food that like honestly wasn't the most healthy, but like or very carb heavy. And so there was an element of restriction growing up, and I think I took that as a binge route. So going to friends like houses or parties or anything, like I just felt like I could never have it again, so I would just like binge on those things. But then I also didn't know how to dose for it, or it just almost became as like a numbing thing to where that would affect my blood sugar. And so that was a very long time. And then in college, I think that came to a peak too, of like I was able to finally make my own decisions and do whatever I wanted. And so I felt like almost freedom, like my view of not letting diabetes affect me was like allowing myself to eat whatever I wanted. And so that was like a large part of my story, of having these like binge restrict cycles, of feeling guilty around food, of almost placing morality on food, which like it being good or bad or all these things, and then feeling terrible about my body and having really poor body image because of all these things. And so when I worked with my health coach on my hormones, we also worked a lot on my relationship to food, and I like had a light bulb moment and realized like, okay, like if food isn't good or bad, it's just nourishing or not more nourishing. Or food, you're able to look at it and say like, in certain circumstances, like when you are valuing relationships and you're over a good meal and it may not be the best for me physically, like if it meets a need of my like social desires, or like makes that feel really good, like that could be nourishing for me, just in a different perspective. And so I just had to rebuild my entire framework around food, and like the pathways in my brain that were paved for my whole life over like food being good and bad and guilty and shame, like I just had to rewire the way I was thinking towards, okay, like is this worth it? Like if I'm sharing a good meal with a friend, like a part of my health is social health. And if this is nourishing that, then like this is good. And so over like probably a few years, it was just rebuilt. And that also just affected the way that I was able to sustainably maintain a lifestyle that supported my body and my social health, which is ultimately like I think your full perspective of health, right? Like it's not just our bodies.
Absolutely. And I love that balance that you have so much. That's exactly what we try to get out to our community, especially with kids. Like, yes, they can go to the birthday parties, they can have the pizza and the cake, and like they don't necessarily have to eat low carb, or we say they don't at all because that's what we believe. But at the same time, we always say, how would you treat your child if they were just, you know, a kid without diabetes? You want to be a healthy human first, whether you have type 1 or not. And that looks like being able to have that balance, and enjoying life is so important. Like, what is all of this work for that we're putting into our blood sugars if we don't also get to enjoy it at the end of the day? So I love that. Can you maybe give us some specifics that you focus on in terms of like when you're building your plates, maybe that help you kind of find that balance and help your blood sugar?
Yeah. So this is another thing so interesting is that growing up, I feel like there was never much of a conversation around the importance of a protein, a carb, and a fat at every meal, snack, anything. So when I build my plates, they always have probably more protein than fat and carb. And when I'm at home specifically, I really look into ingredients. So because the small ingredients are what can cause inflammation over time. And since I do prioritize like social health and going out and enjoying food, then I want like when I'm at home to be really focused on nourishing and supporting and being low inflammatory foods. So when I look at my plate, I look at high quality protein, so like grass-fed beef and pasture-raised chicken, stuff like that, just like high quality. I look at my carbohydrates being just like whole foods, mostly like rice, sweet potato, potatoes, and then my fats being like avocado, olive oil, just like whole food ingredients. And so when you get to do that, when I do that, it's like I'm not restricting anything. It's just what can I add in onto my plate. And so even snacks, I think that's another thing. Like it's so easy when you think about like what I had as a snack as a kid to think like, oh my gosh, that's just like 30 grams of pure carbs. Like rarely do snacks have protein too. And so when I look at my plates, it's through a mindset of what can I add in and not what can I remove. And
I love that.
Yeah. So like when I look at a snack, if like, especially like I think of like my sister's children, it's like they really want the goldfish or they really want X, Y, or Z. It's the mindset of like, okay, what can I add in here? Can I add in peanut butter? Can I add in like rolled up meats or something of just like what can you add in to just balance it out a little, because the smallest tweaks can make the biggest difference.
Yeah, it really does make a difference in that spike that you have, and just which then leads to lowering your inflammation because you're not having those roller coasters. So it's all so connected. Actually, yesterday, I think by the time this comes out, it'll be safe to say that Amanda had her baby. So I was hanging out with her daughter yesterday, who has type 1, both her daughters, while all of that was happening. And we actually went to an Easter egg hunt that they had, and they had a hot dog situation with chips and like just very classic cookout kind of food. Yeah. And I also build my plate very much in the same way as you, like focusing on those high quality meats and whatever. Hadn't had a normal hot dog in forever.
Yeah.
But we all just like grabbed one. I was like, yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. Had a hot dog and chips. And I don't think it was the hot dog at all. It's the white bread of the bun. I like gave insulin probably for around the right amount of carbs that it was. But I had such a high blood sugar spike after, and it was just such a reminder that processed foods do act so differently in your body than when you're just eating whole foods. And I'm just saying that not to tell parents don't let your kid have the hot dog, but you're not crazy if you're dosing for those Ruffles chips like I had and for the hot dog bun with the carb ratio that usually works, but then it actually isn't working because it's different the way that it processes in your body. And just having all of that just carbiness, I guess.
Yeah.
With the chips, it was rough. It took a while to get that blood sugar down, and then I dropped because I was rage bullsing because I wanted to come down, and then it was like I was on that cycle. So different foods act so differently in your body, and a carb is not a carb. Like, carbs are not all equal. It's just the reality. So
For sure.
yeah. What else now, like if you were to walk us through a day in your life, what kind of things do you do to kind of keep that inflammation level low?
Totally. Yeah. I would say, so just like to preface that, I feel like I like to just tell my like clients that like the habits are the structure of every day so that you don't feel weighed down by like having type 1 diabetes. So when those just become natural, then you don't feel like it's on your brain all the time. It allows you to have like more capacity for the rest of your life. And so the habits are some form of movement every single day, ideally in the morning. And I would say lifting weights, so like building muscle is so important. Another thing I didn't know for a long time, and that helps boost that insulin sensitivity. So movement, even walking after meals, after dinner. I would say a walk after dinner is something that I do with my husband often. And then I have breakfast. This is like my most regimented habit, but breakfast within like the first 30 minutes to an hour of waking up and before drinking coffee is everything. And having at least 20 to 30 grams of protein when I eat my breakfast. That is what I call like my anchor throughout the day. And if I don't have that, then I am chasing blood sugars often, or things just like won't make sense in my day. So movement, having breakfast within 30 minutes, having 20 to 30 grams of protein in that, and I would say drinking enough water. I think a lot of sometimes like when I was working on shifts at the hospital, I would just be like trailing around the 200s, and I would be like, why? I'm moving. And it's just like, I haven't had a sip of water in 3 hours. And I think that's something that's easy to forget. But yeah, when you are well hydrated, then your blood sugars will have a lower baseline than if you're not. And so drinking enough water, and just balancing the plate. So always having like a protein, carb, and a fat around every carb, never like just having an empty carb. And that's especially like, I love dessert and sweets because I mean, it's just great. And so when I do that, it's just always through a lens of what, like a strategy of how can I do this successfully. And so having, like if I do have dessert after dinner, like making sure it's after dinner, like after I've had a protein in my diet, or if I am going to have, like we go on a walk to get ice cream, well then making, like we walk back. So knowing how to dose with a walk post dessert. So I would say those are like the biggest things that I do in my day to day to decrease inflammation for sure.
I love that so much. Just, it's so crazy how similar our stories are, because I also definitely dealt with that binge cycle as a kid. And it's funny because my parents really didn't restrict anything necessarily, but the rules that were put in place around my management at a young age by the doctors, especially when I was on shots, it was like, you can only eat 45 carbs for this meal, 15 carbs for snack, whatever. So it was restriction, even though it wasn't my parents actively doing it. And eventually when I got a pump and I was able to dose myself and I was at birthday parties by myself and dance class and whatever, I was just eating everything I possibly could. And I was so addicted to sugar. And that's another thing I want to talk about, because I mean, that's common for kids anyways, but I think people don't realize that when you're on the blood sugar roller coaster, you crave sugar more. And all of a sudden, it was actually right after I had gotten off the pill, finally got everything regulated, I wasn't craving sugar as much. It was so weird. Like, all the food noise that I had had for so many years started to go away, and my A1C had gone down. I think it was at this somewhere in the sixes at that point. But yeah, it's like that stuff is so related. Yeah. So do you have anything to speak to that, like with sugar and
yeah, absolutely. I would say I feel like growing up I was just always hungry, and I would like nothing ever felt like it was satisfying my hunger. Like and my mom, like she like now would say that she would speak to that and she'd be like, it's so true, like you always could eat. And I felt shame from that of like, why can I eat so much? And I think to your point, like it's this one like imbalanced blood sugar roller coaster that we're on that does communicate to your brain that you're always hungry, and the food noise is just so real. But then once you have like these anchors and your blood sugar to just keep you stable throughout the day, it's gone. Like you're satisfied by your meals, you're satisfied by your snacks, you're not constantly thinking about food, and it does free up your mind for everything else in your day. And I feel like, so I just feel really passionate about that, because and it's not just type 1 women, like it's so many women that are ruled by these like narratives around society, around food and around our bodies and around all these things. But like when we're constantly thinking about our food and our like being unsatisfied, then it affects how we show up in our lives, and it affects how we show up in our relationships and in school, in work, and everything. And so really like just the importance of learning how to support our bodies and to do it in a natural, like holistic way, just because the payoff is getting to feel like yourself again.
Yes. We always say like it's not just about getting the good blood sugars for that like A+ report card. It's because you actually feel good, and that's what matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think so often, like in a doctor's appointment or in the medical field, it's like so value driven, like so numbers driven, that it creates us like our minds to be wired for I need to just get this percentage range and then I hit success, or like I need this A1C and then I'm good enough. But
Right.
I think just like you said earlier, like realizing what is that for? Like you get the number for the ability to live a full life and to like feel really good in who you are and like what you're doing. And so I think though when we address the root issue and the why, instead of when you do that, you can heal internally, then you get the good A1C, you get the good time in range as a side effect of everything else. But I think sometimes when we're chasing the A1C or the time in range, then it's not sustainable, because there's a lot of things underneath that are not ever addressed, and then that just like goes left unsettled.
Yeah, that's so true. Do you have any tips specifically for parents on all of this? Because I really do want to acknowledge, like, we understand kids are picky, and it's not as simple as just being like, oh, have a balanced plate. Like, that's not always possible at all.
Yeah, totally. And I work with like some of my clients that are parents, and they say like just that. They're like, my kid is picky and they don't like X, Y, and Z, which is so fair. And so I would say like the one thing that is the most helpful and that we work on is looking at the ingredients of what they are eating. So like a lot of kids I think want like waffles or pancakes or something like that in the morning. And so looking at what are those things made up of and what can we add in to just prevent this spike. And so instead of it being all or nothing, like this all or nothing mindset of like fruits and veggies and everything of what we know to be good and nothing of the bad, it's like meeting them where they're at and in the middle and saying, okay, if you really want a waffle, like what can we add in protein wise or fat wise to just like help minimize the spike, and then go from there and see what works.
Yes, I love that. It's true. Like, especially nowadays, there are so many brands out there that are making swaps that actually taste good, that have a little extra protein in them, or even like I love making like the Simple Mills brand, like banana bread, and like you can replace some of the flour with protein powder, like adding stuff in for your kids so that it has more balance, but they're still having the exact foods they love, and they don't need to be low carb, right? But just the fact that it's made with more whole ingredients does lower the blood sugar impact. It's crazy.
For sure. Yeah. And that's like the biggest takeaway I think of a lot of people, is the realization like, okay, like I think that's the biggest stigma, is because that just feels unrealistic to say, okay, you're never going to have pancakes ever again, or you're never going to have waffles ever again. And that just makes everything feel frustrating and just more hard, versus saying like, okay, when we look at this, like you said, like, could we switch it with almond flour? Could we just add peanut butter on top? Can we put an egg in there, or a bacon, or even like giving up that feeling of like, okay, bacon's like has more fat, but just like being okay because it's protein. Like, I think it's just like really seeing the perspective of what can I add in instead of take out, and then be able to see the benefit of that, and then just grow from there. Like growing with your kid, they're gonna have different preferences as they get older, and just like meeting them where they're at and seeing and just playing around with it. And if they don't like something, like that's okay, like, and then you just try again another time.
Exactly. Okay, taking it a little bit of a different direction, you mentioned that you were a little bit not excited to have technology at one point, right? Did that change?
Yeah.
What are you on now? What did that journey look like?
Yeah, it definitely changed. I'm on Omnipod 5 and Dexcom now. It looked like for me, I think it was a way that I wanted to be like everyone else, and so I didn't want to have technology. I think as I've gotten older and like been more a part of this type 1 community, I've seen there's 2 different types almost of people growing up. It was like people that were super invested in type 1 community, and then people that weren't. And I think I categorized myself in not wanting to, and like I also did dance, so like I didn't want to wear my devices when I was at dance studio or whatever. And so that was my story for a long time, and I was very stubborn with it. And I would say like an element of that was people would like force technology on me, and I felt unseen and I felt unheard of why I didn't want it. And I think that made me even more resistant to doing it, because I just didn't feel like anyone was listening to how I was really feeling about it. And I actually, when I moved post-college and got my first job, I found an endocrinologist that was so kind about it and was actually like willing to listen and say like my feelings were valid. Like before I ever got on a CGM, my A1C was already dropping at that point. And then like because of her kindness and gentleness towards that, I was then open to getting a CGM. And then over time, like seeing those patterns made me more open to getting a pump. And so I would say for me, it was just having someone that listened to me and I felt seen and not judged by not doing what now I know. I'm like, yeah, is it easier to manage diabetes with technology? 100%. Like, and I can do a way better job now probably than then. But I think meeting people where they're at and saying like, okay, like this is your body. Like you are the one living with this day in and day out. And when she was like, if you don't want this, that's okay. And like, how can we get you to where we want to be without this stuff? Then I finally felt heard and open to the idea of using technology. And so then when I hit that phase, then I was able to really engage with it. And now I love like the Omnipod 5 and my Dexcom, and they make my life so much easier. But I feel really passionate about just letting people decide like for themselves instead of being forced into what is easier for a provider to control.
Yeah, or for the parent.
Yeah.
That's so real. And I've shared this before on here, but the gist of what happened with my technology story was my mom saying like, this will be so much easier for you if you have a pump. You'll be able to, eat without getting extra shots. But she always said, if you don't like it, you can switch back, right? And having that option. And then once I got on it, I never wanted to leave. But with my Dexcom, it wasn't until I was actually around other people who were wearing it and I saw how easy it was for them to check their number. I was like, oh, yeah, that actually sounds nice. But I had been told about it by my doctor and by my family over and over again. And yeah, the more you push, the more resistance you're probably going to get. And yeah, it just feels unfair as the person living with it to be forced to wear these things when you're not the one getting the choice. So
for sure,
I really appreciate that. Cool. Well, is there anything else that you want to share, especially about like your childhood with type 1, or any like final words you'd say to parents who are listening?
Yeah, I think as like an adult with type 1, the biggest takeaway I've had, and to parents I say, is just like empathy over anything else, of just like listening and asking and checking in, like, how is your child feeling? Because I think I went through a very long time without even being asked, like, how does this make you feel? And so I think maybe you'll get a response, maybe you won't, like kids are kids, but I think having that validation of like, you're going through something really hard, like this is hard, and like carrying the weight with them and validating that feeling, and then also just being like, how are you doing? And I think that may seem very simple, but it goes a long way. And yeah, I think it's important.
Amazing. Well, I just love your outlook on everything. I feel like you have such a realistic take on type 1 that's also just prioritizing actual health and not just like the things we're told to care about. Where can people find you if they want to work with you or just follow along on your Instagram?
My Instagram is the CP table, and so I'm on Instagram. I have a website. My website is in my link in bio, and if you ever want to work with me, you can just message me either on Instagram or on my website to contact me, and I would love to connect and chat.
Awesome. And I'll put all of those links in the show notes as well. We always wrap up our podcast with a blood sugar roll call if you're open to sharing where you're at.
Absolutely. I'm 167.
I'm 168.
Oh my gosh, are we twins?
We're definitely in sync in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on and being so cool about rescheduling and having an earthquake when we first started and all the things, but I'm so glad we made it happen. And yeah, I hope we get to connect more in the future.
Yeah.
Talk to
thanks
y'all
so much.
later. See you next week.